Hi everyone, this is Professor Hall, and we're coming back today with some more poem explication. So if you watched the first video on a different day, just to reiterate, explicating a poem means that you are taking apart all those pieces of the poem, the narration, if there is any, the characterization, the figurative language, the symbolism, the imagery, all of those elements we've been talking about, and you discuss what the poem's meaning is, and then how those features contribute to that meaning. So we looked in our previous video about the poem My Last Duchess, and today we're going to be looking at three poems, I guess, if you want to say three. The first one is Anyone Lived in a Pretty How Town by E. Cummings. So I have you guys writing about this in a journal entry, but I wanted to discuss it briefly before you write about it, because it's a poem that can be like My Last Duchess, a little bit tricky. It's kind of it's done in a little more of an abstract way than some of the other things that you're reading, and I think it would be helpful for me to just explain a few of the elements and explicate it a little bit, or at least explicate a portion of it, and then let you talk about the interpretation. So, Anyone Lived in a Pretty How Town by E. Cummings. Anyone lived in a pretty how town, with up so floating many bells down. Spring, summer, autumn, winter, he sang his didn't, he danced his did. Women and men, both little and small, cared for anyone, not at all. They sowed their isn't, they reaped their same, sun, moon, stars, rain. Children guessed, but only a few, and down they forgot as up they grew, autumn, winter, spring, summer, that no one loved him more by more. When by now in tree by leaf, she laughed his joy, she cried his grief. Bird by snow and stir by still, anyone's any was all to her. Someone's married their everyone's, laughed their cryings and did their dance, sleep, wake, hope, and then they said their nevers, they slept their dream. Stars, rain, sun, moon, and only the snow can begin to explain how children are apt to forget to remember, with up so floating many bells down. One day anyone died, I guess, and no one stooped to kiss his face. Busy folk buried them side by side, little and little and was by was. All by all and deep by deep and more by more they dream their sleep. No one and anyone, earth by April, wish by spirit, and if by yes. Women and men, both dong and ding, summer, autumn, winter, spring, reaped their sowing and went their came, sun, moon, stars, rain. This is one of my favorite poems. I almost had it read at my wedding, and then I got outvoted. My husband said he didn't want the poem read in the end, so I got outvoted. But one of the things about this poem, to click back to our notes for a minute, and it is printed for you again in Blackboard, and there's a link to it. So if you want to read it again, which I hope that you do, and you'll need to anyway before you do your homework, but one of the things here that is very important with this poem is, first and foremost, determining the literal meaning. You cannot unpack or explicate this poem until you do that. So, what is actually going on? Well, we have a couple characters. Two in particular, and then three kind of like a background group characters, right? The first one is anyone. Anyone lives in a pretty how town. Women and men. Then we have children. And then we have no one. My mother read this poem and said, Megan, who is Noonie? And I was like, it's not Noonie, it's no one. And she said, oh, I thought it was Noonie. So here's what's going on. If we, E. Cummings, the author, he wants to write poems sometimes in a very whimsical way. So he uses this idea of mixing the words up a little bit. Hopefully, I think if I read it correctly, you can kind of hear the rhythm. It's got a rhythm kind of like a children's poem. But it's not a children's poem, really. So we have anyone who lives in a town singing and dancing. Women and men don't care for him. They're sowing there isn't, they're reaping their same. Sowing is in farming, like when you sow seeds, and when you reap means that you take the harvest at the end of the day. Children guessed that no one loved him more by more. She sings his joy and cries his grief, and anyone is all to her. Sorry, I forgot that there's two things here. Someone's and everyone's are getting married and laughing and crying and doing their own dance. They're sleeping and dreaming. And then anyone dies and no one stoops to kiss his face, and then they are buried side by side. So that's essentially the story. We have two people, anyone and no one, in this town, and other people are kind of commenting on them in a way. I kind of think of this poem like A Rose for Emily. I feel like anyone and no one are in this town, but they're kind of separated from the men and the women, the children, the anyones and the everyone's and the someone's, rather. So we looked at symbolism in My Last Duchess, and we're going to look at that a tiny bit here too. Structurally, we have town and down, same and rain are kind of near rhyme, but we don't have, what we do have really is this repetition. So spring, summer, autumn, winter, and sun, moon, stars, rain. Then we get summer pushed to the end, autumn, winter, spring, summer. And then we have stars, rain, sun, moon, and summer, autumn, winter, spring. So what do those things mean? Well, a lot of times, if you're talking about seasons in that way, you're trying to show that time is passing. Similarly, when you're talking about the sun and the moon and the stars, and the rain's coming, that could maybe symbolize time passing as well. So it's sort of, if we look here, he lives in a pretty town, and through these seasons of his life, he is singing and dancing. Now, it's kind of, I think, here, singing as didn't and he danced as did. It's kind of like saying he marches to the beat of his own drummer. He's going to sing what he doesn't want. He's going to dance what he does want. And the women and men don't care for him. Why? Because they're sowing and reaping. Now, sowing and reaping could refer to farming, as I said before, but what could it maybe symbolize? The everydayness of life, of going in and doing your work, getting your harvest, coming home, and what are they? They are all the same, right? Whereas anyone is singing and dancing. And they don't care for that because they're going about their day over and over again. They get up, they go to work, they come home, they go to sleep. They get up, they go to work, they come home, they go to sleep. And meanwhile, anyone is singing and dancing. Now, it's interesting here that we have children guessed. Children guessed that no one loved him more by more. I'm ignoring kind of this part in the middle. But why did they guess that no one loved him more by more? Is it because they're children? And children can kind of see things adults don't? And if you notice, only a few children guessed this. And they forgot, down they forgot as up they grew. It's kind of like saying they forgot as they grew up, right? If we rearrange those words a little bit. one of the things that I asked you to do for your homework is to talk about what you think the relationship between anyone and no one is like. So a few people believe that anyone and no one are lovers, or that they're maybe husband and wife. And other people think that anyone and no one are, that anyone is a son and no one is his mother. And the thing here really hinges on children. How do you interpret children? One of the things hinges on children. There are other things in the poem later on. But do children guess this because anyone is a child? I don't know. When by now and tree by leaf. Again, some things that indicate time passing. No one is laughing his joy and crying his grief. They are feeling the same emotions. Her tears are his tears. His laughter is her laughter. And I think that there's room for interpretation on both sides. Is this someone who is a mother who has a child who's a little bit different and not accepted? And the children can see that she loves him even though others don't? Or is this a man who throughout the seasons of his life, and maybe he grows up, and men and women don't care for him, but no one does, and she sees how special and different he is? So those are some of the questions to look at. And the second part here of the poem, someone's married their everyone's, laughed their cryings and did their dance. Now it's interesting here. Laughed their cryings, because we just had laughed his joy and cried his grief. So why are these people laughing their cryings? It's because they're not on the same page the way these two are. They're not as conjoined or as tied together. They don't have, someone cries and they laugh, basically. There's something wrong there. It doesn't seem to them, but they said their nevers, they slept their dream. Stars, rain, sun, moon, and only the snow can begin to explain how children are apt to forget to remember. So again, we have children forgetting to remember and children growing up. And the idea that perhaps as children grow up, they get to laughing people's cryings instead of laughing their joys and crying their grief. One day anyone died. I like this part, I guess. As if anyone is not really important to the speaker of this poem either. And no one is bending down to kiss his face. And apparently when she stoops to kiss his face, perhaps she dies of grief also. And the busy folk, the people who have been reaping and sowing and saying their nevers before they go to sleep, the busy folk bury them. Little by little. So still, to the busy folk, they're not very significant. However, all by all and deep by deep. So going deeper into that, they're dreaming their sleep, wished by spirit, if by yes. Women and men, both dong and ding, reaping their sowing, summer, autumn, winter, spring, reaped their sowing and went their came, sun, moon, stars, rain. So folk buried them. More by more, they dream their sleep. It's a wish by their spirit, and they're trying to say yes. And meanwhile, the men and the women go back to their work. So we have something here, it seems like, even after death, that somehow no one and anyone are tied together and dreaming together in this beautiful world where they can accept each other, whatever their relationship might be. So the author's message, which is really the point of the explication. What's the author's message? I think if you look at the elements of the poem, the way that time passes, the diction that they use of E. Cummings uses of sowing and reaping, the word choice of singing and dancing, and some of the symbolism there, the characterization of anyone and no one, the characterization of the busy folk of the town. If you put that all together, it has this really beautiful message that if you are like anyone and you are different, there will be someone there to love you. And it may not be right away. It may not be someone in your hometown. People might not care for you at all, but maybe there will be someone there who loves you in some way, whatever way that is. If it's a motherly love, if it's a friendship, if it's a romantic love, this is someone who gets it. This is someone who laughs with you and who cries with you and who feels your pain and who loves you no matter what your song and dance is. And they see you outside of the busyness of the world, and you are important. That's what E. Cummings is trying to say. So with that, we're going to take another brief pause here, and the next video in your sequence is going to be about Richard Cory, which is much less uplifting than this one. So if you need to watch this again after we talk about Richard Cory, I totally get it. Thanks.